I stood near the service entrance holding a tray of cocktail napkins while my sister Chloe raised a crystal flute to toast herself. The ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and fresh money. $150,000. That was the budget for tonight's corporate merger gala. And standing there in her $5,000 silk gown, Chloe looked every inch the successful vice president of operations. She scanned the room, soaking in the applause from the board of directors until her eyes landed on me. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. She paused, her speech lowered her glass and pointed directly at me. "And a special thanks," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone echoing off the high ceilings, "to my little sister Emily standing over there by the kitchen." Heads turned. 200 people looked at me in my plain black dress and sensible shoes. Chloe laughed, a light dismissive sound. "She's just here to fetch the napkins tonight, everyone. Consider her our little charity hire. We have to keep the family employed somehow, right?" The room rippled with polite, uncomfortable laughter. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I just gripped the edge of the tray a little tighter. Before we watch the smile get wiped off her face, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Have you ever been the smartest person in the room but treated like the invisible one? I want to hear your story. The laughter died down, but one person wasn't smiling. Ethan, Chloe's fiancé, was standing right next to her. He was a corporate fixer, the kind of man who was paid to notice details others missed, and right now he was looking at me with a frown of confusion. He'd seen me in the office for months, seen the late nights, seen the stacks of files on my desk. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice cutting through the awkward silence. "Emily," he asked, genuine curiosity in his tone, "what is your actual title here?" The room went dead silent. Chloe's smile froze. She tried to laugh it off again. "Oh, Ethan, stop it. She's just an admin, a paper pusher." But Ethan didn't look away. He was waiting. I set the tray of napkins down on the nearest table with a deliberate, heavy thud. It was the only sound in the room. I looked at my parents, Jeffrey and Susan, who were sitting at the VIP table, their faces pale. They knew. Deep down, they knew what was coming. Then I looked at Chloe. I didn't stutter. I didn't whisper. I spoke with the clarity of a judge reading a verdict. "I am not an admin," I said. "I am a senior forensic auditor." The words hung in the air like smoke. You could see the gears turning in people's heads. Auditor. Not a clerk, not a secretary. An auditor. The person who finds the bodies. Chloe blinked her brain, struggling to process the shift in reality. "What, you? You're lying. You're just jealous." I didn't argue. I didn't need to. For 5 years I had utilized what psychologists call the gray rock method. I made myself boring. I made myself useless. I became the beige furniture in the corner of the room that nobody notices. I wore drab clothes, spoke in a monotone voice, and never ever offered an opinion. And because I was invisible, they forgot I was there. They discussed kickbacks in front of me. They left bank statements on my desk because Emily wouldn't understand them anyway. They openly bragged about their theft while I poured their coffee. They thought my silence was weakness. They didn't realize it was camouflage. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. The red cover was worn from use. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. 5 years of transactions. 5 years of lies. "I haven't just been filing your papers, Chloe," I said, my voice calm, factual, lethal. "I've been building a case." I tapped the screen, projecting the first document onto the ballroom's main presentation monitors behind me. It was a timeline. A simple, brutal timeline of the last 5 years. To understand why I stayed, why I let them treat me like a servant for 60 months, you have to understand the economy of my family. My parents, Jeffrey and Susan, always believed that if you looked successful, you were successful. They invested everything in Chloe because she was the perfect billboard for the family brand, loud, charismatic, and beautiful. I was the back office. I was the overhead cost they wanted to minimize. When the family business started hemorrhaging money 5 years ago, they didn't hire a consultant, they called me. "We just need someone to organize the files, Emily," my father had said, offering me minimum wage. "You're good at details. Just keep the lights on while Chloe closes the big deals." So I did. I kept the lights on. But while I was organizing the files, I found the rot. I scrolled the tablet, highlighting a series of transactions from 3 years ago. "You all see Chloe as the vice president," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned ballroom. "I see her as a liability. But I didn't stay for the company. I stayed for the one asset in this family that actually has value." I looked directly at Chloe, who was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Mia, I said. The name landed harder than the job title had. Mia was Chloe's 7-year-old daughter. The daughter Chloe trotted out for Christmas photos and ignored for the other 364 days of the year. For 5 years I have been the silent investor in this family, I continued. Not in the business. In the child you neglect. I swiped to a new page. It wasn't a corporate spreadsheet. It was a comparison chart. On the left side were Chloe's expenses, a $15,000 invoice for the custom silk gown she was wearing right now, a spa weekend in Aspen, a lease on a Porsche. On the right side were my expenses. September 14th, I read from the ledger. Mia needed braces. Chloe said she didn't have the liquidity. I paid $6,000. October 3rd. Mia's private school tuition was 3 months overdue. The school was threatening expulsion. Chloe was in Cabo San Lucas posting photos of margaritas. I paid $12,000. I looked at my parents. They were shrinking in their seats, terrified, not by the moral failure, but by the public airing of it. I didn't stay in the corner because I was afraid of you, I said to them. I stayed because I knew if I left, Mia's tuition checks would bounce. I stayed because while Chloe was playing executive, her daughter was wearing shoes with holes in the soles until I bought her new ones. The room was heavy with a different kind of silence now. It wasn't awkwardness anymore. It was judgment. The board members weren't looking at a disgruntled employee. They were looking at a witness. I realized a long time ago that my compassion was a luxury you were overdrafting, I said, closing the personal file and opening the corporate one. So, I stopped being a sister. And I became an auditor. And, when you look at the math, the numbers are ugly. The silence in the ballroom didn't last. It was broken by the sharp click of heels on marble as my mother Susan rushed toward me. My father Jeffrey was right behind her. They didn't look at the screen. They didn't look at the invoices showing their granddaughter's unpaid medical bills. They didn't look at the evidence of the theft that had gutted their own company. They looked at me, and their eyes were filled with hate. "Turn it off," Jeffrey hissed, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, painful. "Turn it off right now, Emily. How dare you?" "We are in the middle of a merger," Susan whispered, her voice trembling with rage, not shame. "You are ruining your sister's night. You are ruining everything." I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time in years without the filter of a daughter's hope. They weren't horrified by the crime. They were horrified by the exposure. They didn't care that Chloe was a thief. They cared that the board of directors now knew she was a thief. I pulled my arm away from my father. "I'm not ruining it," I said calmly. "I'm saving you from a federal indictment. If the merger goes through with fraudulent books, you all go to prison. I'm doing you a favor." "You're just jealous," Susan snapped, loud enough for the front table to hear. "You've always been jealous of her." Then came Chloe. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She laughed. It was a high, brittle sound bordering on manic. She turned to the board members, spreading her hands in a gesture of helpless amusement. "I am so sorry, everyone," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "My sister, she's been struggling lately, mental health issues. She goes off her medication and gets paranoid, delusional." She looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the look of a predator realizing the cage door is open. "Emily, honey," she said, her tone dripping with fake concern. "Let's get you some water. You're hallucinating again. None of this is real." I watched her with clinical fascination. This was the first phase of what psychologists call the narcissist's collapse, denial. When the false reality is threatened, the narcissist doesn't feel guilt. They feel an existential threat. They will say anything, destroy anyone to keep the mask from slipping. She wasn't scared of the law yet. She was scared of being seen as ordinary. "Security," Chloe called out, waving to the guards by the door. "Please escort my sister out. She's having an episode." The guards hesitated. They looked at the screen where the numbers were still glowing in high definition. They looked at Chloe, manic and sweating in her silk gown, and they looked at me standing perfectly still, holding the tablet like a shield. "I wouldn't do that," I said to the guards. Then I turned back to the room. I wasn't just the admin anymore. I wasn't the little sister. I was the only person in the room who knew exactly where the money was. "I'm not hallucinating, Chloe," I said. "And I'm not leaving, because I haven't shown them the second page yet." I stepped past the frozen security guards and walked over to the AV console. The tech guy, a nice kid named Kevin, whose paycheck I'd personally ensured cleared last month, didn't stop me. He just stepped aside. I pulled the HDMI cable from the laptop running Chloe's engagement photo slideshow and plugged it into my tablet. The screen behind me flickered. The romantic photos of Chloe and Ethan in Tuscany vanished. In their place, a massive high-definition spreadsheet illuminated the darkened ballroom. "If you look at the screen," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a tremor, "you'll see why the company hasn't turned a profit in 3 years." I swiped a finger across my tablet. The screen zoomed in on a column labeled External Consulting Fees. $2.5 million, I said. Paid over 36 months to 3 entities: Aurora Solutions, Gilded Sky LLC, and Apex Strategy. I looked at the board of directors. They were leaning forward now, squinting at the data. They knew those names. They signed the checks. "You were told these were market research firms," I continued. "They aren't." I ran the incorporation papers. All 3 are shell companies registered to a residential address in the Cayman Islands. I tapped the screen again. A document popped up next to the spreadsheet. It was a deed. "This address," I said. "It belongs to Chloe." A gasp rippled through the room. It wasn't the polite gasp of a social faux pas. It was the sharp intake of breath that happens when a predator is unmasked. Chloe made a noise, a strangled, desperate sound. That's intellectual property," I was consulting. I didn't even look at her. I kept scrolling. "Exhibit B," I said. "Travel expenses." Photos appeared on the screen. Not receipts, social media posts. Chloe in a bikini on a yacht. Chloe holding shopping bags on the Champs, Élysée. Chloe skiing in the Swiss Alps. These were billed as vendor negotiations and site inspections, I explained. The company paid for the flights. The company paid for the 5-star hotels. The company paid for the champagne. I looked at my parents. My mother was clutching her pearls not out of shock at the theft but out of horror at the public nature of it. My father was staring at the floor, realizing his retirement fund was likely gone. "But here is the part that should really interest the board," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming quieter, more dangerous. I pulled up a bank statement. My personal bank statement. 6 months ago, the operating account hit 0. Payroll was going to bounce. We have 45 employees in the warehouse. People with mortgages. People with kids. I highlighted a transfer. $35,000. I transferred my entire life savings into the payroll account to cover the deficit, I said. I did it again 2 months later. And again last week. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at the screen, his face draining of color. He looked at the transfer dates. He looked at Chloe. "The admin didn't just fetch the napkins," I said to him. "The admin kept the lights on. I paid the drivers. I paid the warehouse team. I paid you." I turned back to Chloe. She wasn't manic anymore. She was small. She was trembling. "You played the executive, Chloe," I said. The board members were exchanging looks, the kind of looks that precede lawsuits and liquidations. But my father, Jeffrey, was still trying to salvage the unsalvageable. He stood up, smoothing his tuxedo jacket with trembling hands, trying to summon the authority he hadn't actually possessed in a decade. "Now let's not be hasty," he said, his voice cracking. "These are family matters. Internal accounting errors. We can handle this internally. There is no need to involve the authorities." "Internal errors," I repeated. "Dad, she bought a Porsche with the warehouse payroll." "We will pay it back," Susan insisted, clutching Chloe's arm as if physically holding her up could stop the legal freefall. "Chloe will pay it back. Won't you, sweetie? It's just a misunderstanding." Chloe nodded frantically, her eyes darting around the room. "Yes, I have assets. I have equity. I'll write a check tomorrow." I looked at them with a profound sense of pity. They still didn't get it. They thought this was about money. They thought they could write a check and make the ugliness go away. "You can't write a check, Chloe," I said, "because you don't have any money left, and neither does Mia." I tapped the tablet one last time. The spreadsheet on the main screen vanished, replaced by a single PDF statement. It wasn't a corporate account. It was a trust fund. Grandmother Edith left $250,000 in a protected trust for Mia's education, I said. It was meant to ensure that no matter what happened to this company, your daughter would have a future. I zoomed in on the balance. $0, 0 cents. A collective gasp went through the room, not the sharp intake of breath from the fraud reveal, but a low guttural sound of disgust. Stealing from a company is a crime. Stealing from your own child is a sin. You forged my signature as the co-trustee, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. You drained the account 3 days ago. To pay for this party. I gestured to the ballroom, to the ice sculptures, to the imported flowers. You liquidated your daughter's future to pay for your engagement party. Chloe's face crumpled. For the first time, the defiance broke. I was going to put it back. Once the merger went through, I was going to put it back with interest. I did it for us. She looked at Ethan, desperate for an ally. Ethan, baby, you understand, right? It was a bridge loan. I did it so we could have the perfect start. Ethan didn't move. He stood there, looking at the woman he had planned to marry. He looked at the screen where the zero balance glowed in red. He looked at me, the admin who had been buying his fiancé's daughter shoes. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply reached for his left hand. The sound of the heavy platinum engagement ring hitting the glass tabletop was quiet, but it echoed like a gunshot. I am an external consultant, Chloe, Ethan said, his voice cold and professional. I advise companies on risk management, and you. He turned his back on her. You are a bad investment. Ethan walking out was the signal. It broke the spell of the gala. The board members, men and women who controlled millions of dollars, didn't make a scene. They didn't shout. They simply stood up, buttoned their jackets, and turned their backs. Wait, Jeffrey cried out, his voice cracking, chasing after the chairman. This is just a misunderstanding. We can explain the liquidity issues. The chairman didn't even slow down. The merger was dead. The stock price would be zero by morning. Then the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open again. It wasn't caterers. It was 4 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. I had called them an hour ago, right before I walked into the room. When Chloe saw the uniforms, the narcissist's collapse entered its final phase, terror. Her face went slack, stripped of the golden child persona she had worn for 30 years. Without the admiration of the room, she was nothing. Just a scared woman in a stolen dress. She didn't run to her fiancé. She didn't run to her parents. She ran to me. She grabbed my shoulders, her nails digging into my skin. Her breath smelled of expensive champagne and panic. Emily, you have to fix this, she whispered, her eyes wide and frantic. You're the genius, right? You're the forensic auditor. You know how to hide things. Cook the books, Emily. Make the numbers go away. I looked down at her hands on my arms. For 5 years she had treated me like furniture. We're family, she pleaded, tears finally spilling over, not for Mia but for herself. You can't let them take me. I can't go to jail. I'm Chloe. You raided your daughter's trust fund, I said, removing her hands from my arms with cold precision. There is no fixing that. Emily, my mother shrieked, rushing over. She wasn't looking at Chloe. She was looking at the police. Do something. If this gets out, we lose the house, we lose the club membership. How could you do this to us? They were still doing it. Even at the end, facing financial ruin and criminal charges, they were worried about their country club membership. They were blaming the auditor for the audit. The lead detective approached us. Chloe Vance. Chloe shrank back, hiding behind our father like a child. But Jeffrey stepped aside. He wasn't going to protect her, not when his own assets were on the line. I have the evidence here, I said to the detective. I handed him the red ledger, my tablet backed up to an encrypted hard drive. It contained every forged invoice, every shell company registration, and the wire transfers from Mia's trust. It's all tagged and indexed, I added. You'll find the embezzlement trail starts on page 4. As the officer read Chloe her rights and clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists, she started screaming. It was a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the empty ballroom. My father turned to me, his face red with a mixture of shame and fury. You destroyed this family, he spat. Are you happy now? You burned it all down. I looked at the empty tables. I looked at the ruined party. And I looked at the sister who had stolen from her own child. I didn't destroy this family, Dad, I said. I just audited it. It has been 6 months since the night the handcuffs clicked. The fallout was exactly as precise and brutal as the audit itself. Chloe pled guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of embezzlement. Her attorney argued for leniency, citing pressures of expectation, but the judge looked at the drained trust fund and gave her 48 months in federal prison. The company was liquidated to pay off creditors. My parents lost the big house, the cars, and the country club membership. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. They still call me sometimes, usually when they've had too much to drink, to tell me I'm an ungrateful traitor. I don't block their numbers, but I don't answer either. I just let it go to voicemail, a record for the archives. I started my own firm, Vance Forensic Accounting. My calendar is full for the next year. It turns out people pay a lot of money for someone who knows how to find what others want hidden. But the most important merger happened in a quiet courtroom last Tuesday. I sat on the porch of my new house watching Mia play in the yard. She was wearing new sneakers, clean ones with solid soles. She turned and waved at me, a bright, unburdened smile on her face. "Mom," she yelled. "Watch this." Mom. The adoption papers were finalized 3 days ago. Since Chloe was in prison and my parents were deemed unfit due to financial negligence, the state agreed that the silent investor was the only one who had ever actually cared for the asset. I looked down at the red ledger sitting on the table next to my coffee. It was full. Every debt paid. Every lie exposed. Every stolen dollar accounted for. Some people called what I did revenge. They said it was cold. They said I should have protected my blood no matter what. But revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. What I did was accounting. I didn't act out of hate. I acted to balance the equation. I subtracted the toxicity so the future could have a positive value. Sometimes love isn't about forgiveness. It's about accuracy. It's about making sure the people who matter get what they are owed. I picked up the ledger one last time. I ran my hand over the worn cover, then I opened the drawer of the patio table, placed the book inside, and locked it. The books were balanced. I walked out into the yard to play with my daughter. I balanced the books and saved my niece. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes justice, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, if you found out a family member was stealing from a child, would you call the police or keep it a secret? I read every single comment.